everybody, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, and when I'm not doing this podcast, I'm probably writing about being outside or hopefully actually being outside.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I'm a registered kinesiologist and an endurance coach, and here on the Consummate Athlete, we look at different sports, different movement specialists, people who are moving. We have talked to people like yourself who hopefully move in all different types of ways or one way really well, and we just try and learn about movement and sport and life ultimately.
Yeah, and for the first time in a while, we're actually both home to record this, which is very exciting.
Yes, very happy to be home to my espresso machine. I am slightly jittery this morning, also to my wife.
I was gonna say.
You picked the order.
I think I know the answer to that, so we'll just let that one go. I've had a good week here by myself in Ontario. We had some gorgeous weather last week and then a solid few inches of snow over the weekend. So I had a very pretty intense couple days of training in the snow, but all good.
Yeah, that springtime struggle, right? It's real. It's rain. It's inclement weather. I saw in Moab, Utah, they had crazy random snow.
Tell you what, I got really grumpy because there's always that old saying, like, March comes in like a lion, out like a lamb. And I was like, it came in like a lion and out like a bigger lion.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you think that's the lamb and it's not, right?
It was not.
It's a good life lesson, I suppose.
Yep. So got to be a consummate athlete the other day and shovel some snow right after my run.
Well, I saw a lot of people were turning into, they're out skiing or, getting that last ski in. I saw a couple powder skis here in Ontario, which I think it's been a decent, like, randomly good year for powder skiing in Ontario. Don't usually go together, but I saw someone shooting some powder on the weekend, which is pretty crazy.
I think it only snowed because I put our skis away.
Yeah, you were talking about that quite early. What else? We got the Shred Girl stuff. Any updates on book releases and parties and other things?
Yeah, I mean, we're just a little over a month out, so people can still pre-order. That's always super helpful for me, for the publisher. And, the more pre-orders we get, the kind of more firepower they're going to put behind it.
Right.
Which means, hopefully there's going to be a lot of young girls around North America and hopefully worldwide that are, going to get exposed to the book and pick up cycling. So I didn't write these books really just for cyclists. I wrote them hoping to get young girls that aren't in cycling to get into cycling.
Sure. And I overuse the Babysitter's Club analogy, which works on about 50% of people, maybe
right?
less, but just like a book for young girls to read and hopefully enjoy. And if that gets them towards cycling, that's great. If it's just if it gets them towards reading, that's great, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's shred-girls.com, and there's links to Amazon. You can also find it just on Amazon, I imagine.
Exactly.
And then we're also doing a few events. There's the launch party is coming up in May.
Yep, May 11th at Joyride 150 in Markham, Ontario.
It's a big bike park, and everyone's welcome, but all women get $5 entry. There's going to be some draw prizes and such, and then a bit of skill instruction. We're going to have a few of the real life Shred Girls are there, so these are people you can see on shred-girls.com who are indeed real life people.
So lots of exciting stuff going on with that. I'm actually working on kind of a secret, like, bonus for pretty much anyone who gets the first book. So that's in the works right now, and I'm pretty stoked on it. And already, if you pre-order and you email me, I'll send you stickers. So lots of good stuff there. And Peter, you just got back from Bear Mountain, the first Canada Cup of the season.
Yeah, I've been on projects here. I for some reason, going into this, like, we do a pretty good job of planning, and we both have our calendars, and we have a calendar together, and multiple.
We might have too many calendars.
I have a lot of calendars, and somehow in my head, I just did not process that I was going to be at camps with younger people for the better part of a month. Somehow this didn't cross my mind that I was just going a 10-day camp and then another 10-day camp with some travel on either side. And
I'm not going to feel bad for you because I came back from Girona after a 2-week camp.
Yeah, that was a long stretch too. Yeah.
Home for 40 hours.
It was all good. It all went pretty well. Really, I mean, as much as like the young people sometimes are challenging, they're also very energetic, and seeing them learn and get stuff. Like we had some, certainly with Ellen's Quest down in Tucson, with 12 young girls. It was super, there's a lot of tears. I think I probably cried more than anyone.
He really did.
But some really good breakthroughs. And then even this past week with Ontario Cycling, we had, some good breakthrough performances in the race we did, but we also did a bit of training ahead and a bit after. And, getting bunny hops is sort of my pet peeve, not a pet peeve.
Pet project?
I don't know, something I really like. And I do believe that bunny hop is like a gateway almost to like confidence in riding. And then I like to think it extrapolates to life, but that might be a bit of a jump. But
well, Canadian Olympian Raphael Gagne agreed with you on the Twitters the other day. So
yeah, Raph and I got out the day after the race. He had raced and had a great race actually. But we got out and hiked the mountain together and talked about all sorts of life things and how it came back to bikes ultimately. But
I feel like we've been having a lot of like existential crisis of man kind of conversations lately.
I don't know if that comes with hanging out with the youth or... I was trying to explain like 1984, the book, which is dear to my heart given that's my birth year, but also I guess current times maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyhow, yeah, a lot of, I guess they don't read them as much anymore. And I was like, oh, that was like, those books were, I felt well timed in high school, right? Because so much of it is existential dilemma of man and questioning authority and right, which is
maybe that's why they stopped having them in high school. They were like, these kids get way too annoying in their senior year.
Yeah,
so
I guess that's an aside in any case. But what else do we have? Is that most of our updates? I think
that's most of our updates.
Yeah, I have a few clinics and stuff coming up in April and May, but we're still maybe a ways away from that. And you can watch. I mean, on the Smart Athlete newsletter, I put that out, and then I try and post stuff as well on Smart Athlete. But yeah, nothing super urgent to post.
All right, so let's dive into this week's questions.
Yeah, some great ones.
The first one I actually really like because it was perfectly timed. Someone asked, "Oat milk, is it a thing? How did I not know about this?"
So this is like a milk type beverage that's derived from oats.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, someone asked this, and I literally just spent 3 weeks researching all things plant substitute milk related for an article. So I'm very skilled at answering this question now. I actually had last week's guest, Lori Netescu, talk to me about different types of milk and what the deal is. And so yes, oat milk is a thing. You make it by soaking oats and then straining them out. So you'd make it the same way you'd make an almond milk. You'd, put almonds and water in a food processor. In this case, you put oats and water in a food processor, process it, let it sit for a bit, and then strain it with a cheesecloth, or you could just go buy oat milk. The thing is, when we say milk, it kind of doesn't mean the same thing as milk, like cow's milk, right? Like the nutrition profile for oat milk is almost entirely carbohydrate, super low calorie, no protein, no fat. And if you're going to get oat milk from the store, it's going to have a ton of additives. It's going to have like xanthan gum or guar gum to
like the
thicken it. Yeah.
And emulsifiers, I think.
Yeah, to make it more milky. It'll probably be sweetened. So just kind of exercise caution when using a milk substitute. It's not that they're bad. It's just that they're not going to give you the exact same thing that cow's milk is going to give you.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, right? A lot of those. And that's why I always like emphasize type beverage, because if you look, like it's even like the almond milks and stuff and the coconut milks, like there's actual coconut milk, which is like
in a can,
the like pureed coconut. And that stuff can certainly have emulsifiers and whatnot as well, but you can get like basically like blended coconut, which would be like coconut milk from like curries and whatnot. But then there's coconut milk beverage is the stuff in the cartons in the store, and most of that stuff, again, because coconut milk tends to separate like peanut butter or anything like fat based, right? Then they have to put these emulsifiers and thickeners and stuff in. And there's definitely like a subset of people that, you know, they think or actually have allergies to whatever, your glutens, your dairies, your whatever, and they get onto these like health aisle type foods. And then you end up with these foods that are heavily processed, really, right? Like it's a milk type beverage that's, as you say, low calorie, but it's, you know, essentially maybe some added sugar or sweetener or flavorings, you know, vanilla flavorings, or what are the other words I'm trying to think of? But
yeah, so it's not necessarily, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just something to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah, especially if I think if you're replacing it and not like there's no, the nutrients aren't coming from something else, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like if you're not having your daily dose of sardines to get, you know, whatever calcium and some fats and stuff, you know, then
Yeah.
like dairy's fairly nutrient rich if you have a good source of dairy, right? But if you're replacing that dairy and calling it milk with, again, carrageenan.
Yeah, both Lori and actually a guest we're going to have on in the next couple weeks, Matt Fitzgerald, who's also a nutrition expert. Both of them were very quick to say milk is actually, if we're going to talk about superfoods, cow's milk actually kind of is. If you look at the nutrient profile, I think Lori said something to the effect of if she was going to be stranded on a desert island and could only have like one or two foods with her, milk would actually be one of them because it has carbs, fat, protein, good amount of like good vitamin profile, calcium, kind of a lot of the stuff that you do need, and it's all in there naturally.
Yeah, I think if you can get decent quality and, you know, a fuller fat and whatnot, and if it doesn't bug your stomach, there's definitely going to be some back and forth on, you know, people that can tolerate it or not. But
So all that to say, oat milk, totally a thing. I really think people should try making their own. Honestly, like it's a crap load cheaper. B, you get oats out of it too, right? You can strain
yeah, I
that.
don't know. Is there like usable at the end of it all?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the same with almond milk. Like what I would do when I used to make my own almond milk is you strain out the milk through a cheesecloth. You have your almond milk that you've made, and then you have these just chopped up almonds that are wet, but you can use them and make a granola or whatever out of them. So you can do the same with oats.
Interesting.
So it's sort of like when you juice fruit when you juice like vegetables or whatever, you can use that pulp and make breads and all kinds of stuff instead of just throwing it out.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that stuff, like, you know, if you do oats and you're looking for like a low calorie way to, you know, if you're going to have what else? Wait, maybe dollop in coffee or.
I do find using oat milk for cereal to be kind of ironic.
It does seem somewhat
redundant.
Yeah. But, you know, if you're just looking for like a milky type substance to put in some cereal or something, and you don't want to consume dairy, like, I guess it's definitely a thing.
Or if you're home and you're out of milk.
Yeah.
But you have oatmeal. So that's oat milk. I probably won't have the article out by the time this episode goes live, but when we do get the article I have on different types of milk up, I'll make sure I add it to the show notes.
Probably something it's on, do you know, can you say who is
Yeah, it'll
publishing
be
it?
on outsideonline.com.
Okay, so I mean, if you do like Molly Herford outside
milk.
Yeah, that should get you close. Yeah, okay. Well,
Okay.
that's milk type beverages.
Yeah, there we go. All right, next question. Peter, this is definitely more for you because I am still a month out of this, but first races of the season, common mistakes that people are making in that first race back after a long off-season winter away from racing.
Yeah, it's tough, right? It depends a little bit. You know, I would refer when Ellen was on and she was talking about races that went well and not well, and we talked a lot in that period of time, but on that episode about, you know, the process goals and the results goals. I think sometimes we come into those first races with just like, you know, training's been going so well, maybe you got a coach and your expectations so like get inflated, and maybe we don't say it to anyone else, but you know, we're coming in and we're like hoping, there's like this hope that we're going to be the world champion, but there's not any, right? Like it just isn't the logical progression of
Sort of
things.
side note, I feel like every time someone says that, where it's like, I want to come into this race and win, you have to kind of step back and assume that at least half of the other people in the race also are coming in thinking they're going to win. So someone's going to win.
Yeah.
But there's going to be a lot of people that had that internal goal of winning that aren't going to hit that.
Yeah. So I think having like objectives for the race, so these are process goals. So you want to make sure that you've scheduled out your day 24 hours beforehand. So meal wise, bike setup. So doing the things that are required by the winner of the race to do. A lot of times those get forgotten and we don't look over our bike well. We don't do a good like opener workout. Sort of your pre-race workout, we've done something odd, we're up late. So if you do want to win, focusing on the things you can control is important. And those are the only things you can control as far as that, at least in the week, the days ahead of the race. In the months ahead, again, training smart, not cramming your training in is going to help, and training specifically for that race. We're going to talk a bit about like transitioning from base to race, base to build and race here in a second. So I'll leave that sort of transition for a bit. We'll come back to that. But as far as mistakes, I would say, again, we're making sure that we're practicing. The big common ones are we haven't used sugar powders or whatever we're going to use in the race, the gels, and we end up with gut rot.
Well, especially if you have a new sponsor for your team, whether it's a club team, whether it's a pro team, whatever, a lot of them switch sponsors throughout the year. So now you've gone from, say, Cliff to Goo, and there's nothing wrong with either of those companies.
They're different. Yeah.
If you just got your swag bag of new products or whatever right before, the week before the race, and you haven't gotten a chance to test them out, you might want to stick to last year's stuff for the first race and give yourself a chance to get used to the new stuff.
And it's always rushed in the spring for Canada for sure. Like we barely get on mountain bikes or even outside sometimes before the race, right? And so I think just that first race ideally is not your A race. We ideally, again, when we're thinking about the people that win the race that matters, there's usually races ahead of that in the weeks ahead. So here we might have some like spring gravel grinders. We call them like spring classics. Those are in a lot of areas. And those races, again, try hard, do the things that it takes to quote unquote win, whatever your win is. But the outcome you're less tied to, right? So we have this gravel grinder. It's point to point. I often do it in the spring. I really just want to get in and work hard for 2 hours. And if I'm often close to the front, I've never won it, but I would love to. But I also I'm not that invested in it. Half the time I decide like weeks maybe out. And it's just really, it's that hard workout in the race, starting the race, getting that stupid start out of the way that we all hate. So that then the next week or two later, when I go to the first, whatever, provincial race or whatever, that then I've already done the start. Mm-hmm. I've already done the routine. I've already worked hard for 2 hours. I remember what it's like to breathe hard and like be pushed to try and hold onto a wheel. And then I'm hopefully more confident going into that race that matters more.
And I think the results, even if you look at the results from the Bear Mountain Canada Cup this past weekend, bears that out. If you look at who won, they were people who've already been racing this season, mm-hmm. while like second through fifth were the people who kind of were opening their season with this race.
Yeah, there's always that like kick in the pants that you realize it's way harder than you remember. We sort of forget, right? And that was definitely in the athletes we had in our camp, and these are all younger athletes, like under in their 20s or teens. The ones that had been at the races previously said the same thing. And we tried to point this out throughout the week that the first race was not their best. Some did okay, but not their best. Second race was better. And then this latest race, they actually were, more up where they might have expected to be, right? Mm-hmm. And there's factors with that, but a lot of it is just getting back in, right? And it's that specificity of training we talk about where the most specific thing is racing. You can't do that year round and expect to be fit, but at some point you need to practice that thing, the specific thing, right? And that's your B's and C races, we sometimes call that, or the lower priority races, right? And that could be, if there isn't a race for you, that could be a very specific trainer workout, an indoor workout, or just a workout that's pretty hard, right? Sort of simulates in some visualizations and practicing your routines just to try and get some of that feeling of going hard. A group ride might be a good way to get people and get pushed out of your comfort level.
Totally. I think the last thing on cycling races specifically is, for the love of God, if your gear has only been on the trainer or you have a new bike for this race,
right.
Let's tighten our bolts. Let's make sure our bikes are working. And if you have Di2, I highly recommend charging it.
Yeah. And again, it's that process, right? Like, what would the winner of the race be doing? And then like, it's the fake it till you make it, if you like, right? Like the winner of the race probably charged their batteries and has their tire pressure and got their bike looked over. And so doing the best you can to act like the winner of the race, right? And again, everyone's win is different. It's not that you're first place, but your best race comes from that process.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and last one is in this, it's still April. It's going to be May. There's still a chance it's going to be really freaking cold at the start of your race. So remember to dress appropriately. Like, you might be racing in a skin suit, but this is probably the time to make sure you've got your jacket and stuff to do your warm-ups and head to the start line and stuff. I've already been thinking my first race of the season is in a month, and I was already thinking yesterday, oh man, I need to remember to bring my pair of like zip off pants so I can pull them off at the start and hand them to my dad because I'm going to race in shorts.
And that's when I say visualizations, right? Like thinking through the scenarios, right? Like the weather is one. So are you set up? Like even like I said to the kids, some of them didn't bring leg warmers. And I was like, and it's like, okay, yeah, for sure. Like the climate in this area would suggest you don't generally need them, but like I would say always you have those because you never know about cold mornings, rainstorms. Again, it snowed at this Moab race, which I think is irregular.
Yeah, everybody at Moab was racing in leg warmers, which is kind of crazy.
To race in leg warmers for sure.
Also, real talk, I ran in knee warmers under leggings the other day because I had packed away a lot of my fleecy leggings.
Right.
Because weather was beautiful all week. Did not expect random 10 inches of snow. And Sunday rolled around and my one pair of fleece leggings I left out were dirty. So I had to run in my Rafa leggings with knee warmers under them. Did not work super well, but my knees stayed warm. So
it's a good strategy.
Yeah.
For sure. And I mean, sometimes having those pieces, right, you can definitely repurpose. I remember one of my first races this is like super early. I was super young and we went to a spring race expecting it to be amazingly warm. You know, it was biking. All we knew about biking was it was in warm weather. So we went and I remember we had like baseball socks in the car randomly because I was still playing baseball. And so I remember cutting the baseball socks and making like, I guess they were essentially knee warmers. I'm sure it was, I wish I had a photo, but I don't. And so, I mean, you learn those lessons once and then, you know, you go out and you get your leg warmers or your whatever, your clothing you need.
I always tell the story of my first ever bike ride with the Rucker cycling team. I showed up in leggings, like not cycling tights, like straight up leggings with normal underwear. I knew nothing about biking. A sweatshirt. It was January. Like really thin gloves. And I remember I was so cold halfway through the ride, we had to stop and one of the guys had to give me his jacket. One guy had to like take off his shoe covers and put them on my feet. Like I was a wreck. So for newer cyclists, you know, I admit it's kind of hard to have all the gear you need, especially, you know, if you've been riding indoors all winter and you're gearing up for your first race ever. But yeah, you can repurpose a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and
cross-country ski gear is great for cycling.
Yeah, and they definitely go back and forth, right? Like the cross-country skiers will sometimes pick on the cyclists for wearing their cycling stuff, but I mean, a lot of it does transfer over pretty well. And I think there's two notes I have. So one, you're visualizing also the start. A lot of us, and I'm guilty of this, like I picture myself on the start line, like on the front line of the race. The reality is a lot of us will not be, especially at some of these spring races that are like bigger mass starts. Running races are often like this. So you have to be ready that you're not going to be the one like flying off the start line. You're going to have to ease into it. You're going to have to deal with traffic. So again, being ready for this, both in a skill perspective, maybe riding in a group or with friends so that you're ready to be like really close to people. Again, makes that start line less nerve wracking. And then also just like you don't get to the start line and just immediately like we haven't even started the race and you've already counted, oh, I'm never going to win. I'm never going to have my win again. That might not be first place because of my start position, because of the situation I was not visualizing, that I was not prepared for. So a big part of that visualization or mental training or preparation is thinking through those scenarios. What happens when I just didn't get to the start line on time, something went right, and I'm at the back? How do I deal with this scenario now to have my best day? And what was my other concept? Oh, spring races. We were talking a lot about weather, and I've actually had a few clients for a variety of reasons. Some of it's easing back after injury or time off or whatever. They've come to me, you know, a little demotivated or overtrained or, you know, again, injured. You don't necessarily have to start the year with races super early. At some point you need to start. If you're going to race, you need to start, but you could get into the season, especially if weather's been an issue, you live in a snowy climate, you might wait till later in the year where you've gotten more outside training, right? You're used to the heat, the weather isn't as big an issue. So then it's not quite as stressful as far as, you know, a lot of things we're talking about is stressful. And first races, I haven't been outside. Well, you can eliminate a lot of that if you just wait till May or June, whatever your climate dictates, right? So sometimes we rush to get to those first races, but
Yeah, it's funny. And I mean, maybe this is just I didn't pay attention to this much racing when I was in my early days, but it does feel like every year the season starts earlier and earlier and earlier.
Yep. Yep, for sure. And you can wait, right? And you don't have to race constantly.
No. And I mean, really, you're going to see a lot of people that are kind of going really hard in this first month sort of start fading a little bit come June.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I'm in a different role in some ways, but I don't know how many I raced last year. I think it was like 7 maybe total races.
And you came back and you won provincials.
I won the provincial world championships. End of the season. Held that form and motivation. Anyhow,
we'll see if you can do it again this year.
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Next question. I really like this one. So we're in April and someone asks, I'm already feeling burnt out, having indoor trainer blahs, and just wondering when to take a break if you're just not feeling it. And I think this is a super good question because I mean we all feel this to certain extents, especially when the weather is doing this like up down up down. It's very easy to feel super motivated one day and then just absolutely like devastated the next day.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, there can be a variety of things. I think that with the online computer programs and even just being indoors, right? Like it does lend itself to that intensity based thing. So whether it's the indoor group rides or posting your numbers on social media or just your time crunch, so you have to do intervals and high intensity this and that all the time. Like there's the common wisdom, which has good support behind it, that you can just only use intensity so much. And at some point it will catch up, right? Like, and so some of that motivation is like, you just can only beat yourself up so often. So a lot of times when I see that in people, it's that every day is like pushing that limit versus putting in the time, right? And some of those workouts are going to feel, I saw a good analogy. It was like a sandcastle, like we're building a sandcastle. That's your fitness. That's, the athlete you're becoming, the person you're becoming. But each of those little sand crystals are meaningless. You don't even see a lot of the sand like as it drops onto the sandcastle.
Also, a tidal wave or just like a total dick on the beach could just come over and knock it down at any time.
I guess there is that side to the analogy. Let's assume our sandcastle is great and big, but
I feel like a regular castle with bricks would have been maybe the better analogy.
Bricks are more sizable, like the sand, like each one. So I mean, sometimes it's just do 30 minutes, light and easy, just put it in the bank. Today, tomorrow, you'll probably feel better and ready to go. I think it's a good rule to try and do something, but just keep it low and easy. And again, put a little sand crystal onto your sand castle.
I'm also actually going to make kind of the opposite argument for doing nothing some days. I think that's been actually a huge change for me, is my coach has me taking 2 days a week off, which is I haven't taken 2 days a week off in 10 years.
Well, and there needs to be variety, right? And often we have like that hour a day. We all use our hour a day. It's the mental break. It's, whatever. There's a lot of reasons for that. But there's definitely that, like, I need to go hard. And it sounds odd, like, oh, no one does that. But I think if a lot of us look, it might not even be hard, but it might be like you say, you're doing something maybe at a moderate pace, but maybe just something every day versus maybe you do 2 off days and then use that extra time, and you can maybe negotiate with family /work /whatever to get a longer workout on a Wednesday or a Sunday.
Yeah, and I can't believe how much better my motivation has been having like true off days.
Yeah.
I'm much happier going back to running the next day.
And I think too, like for skilled people, or not even skilled, I shouldn't necessarily say skilled, but experienced people who have done some element of endurance training for a matter of years, like you do get into that trap where the intensity becomes very important, but that doesn't mean that every day is intense. It means that you have to give yourself a fairly significantly hard workout. And to do that, you need significant recovery and motivation. And so, like, I found myself last year, there's a lot of weeks I got one good workout in and then maybe a decent endurance workout. But there was a lot of days of like 90 minutes, put it in the bank, 90 minutes, put it in the bank, nothing fancy, no crazy wattages, just 90 minutes in the bank. And so my frequency was good. Volume was, I would say, on the moderate side of what you would expect for someone who pretends to race elite still. But then intensity would even be on the lower side. And I think it's just, but I had one really good as a minimum, some weeks two, like maybe the average was like 1.25 or something. But I found that way, like just I was like crushing one day a week, and motivation, like you say, was really high. But
side note, we have a psychologist on in an upcoming episode, and she's actually been listening to the podcast. One day I would love to have her just come on and be like, so when you said this thing, just when you mentioned pretending to race elite, now that I know she listens, I'm like, oh God, what would she say about that? So I'm now hearing all of this through the lens.
You could certainly. I never actually committed. That's what it was.
Yep, there we go. She also says you might not be ready to get a dog, which I'm really sad about.
She's good. Okay. Is that all we have on this?
I think that's all we have on that, but that leads us very neatly into kind of this next topic of, okay, so most people, if you're following kind of a traditional build into race season, you've recently shifted from, or are about to shift from your base miles into adding more intensity.
Right.
And we've talked about, we think there's kind of two ways that people end up messing up here. And the first is we just never shift back to intensity. Turns out base miles are actually pretty fun for a lot of people. Like it's, pretty relaxing. It's not the hardest thing. It feels really good when you've nailed like a 6-hour ride or whatever. You feel super fit doing that, but you're not really getting any of the top end. And then the flip side is, okay, the intensity switch is on, and it's on. So you have people going out and going super hard kind of right off the bat.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid?
We've talked a little bit in the past about, so there's your base and build and that sort of linear periodization, in that it progresses towards a goal. And usually traditionally that would go from endurance training, maybe some tempo middle ground training, to like some more anaerobic type training, just using sort of broad terms, as you got closer to the race. If you could step back from that more like cycling type analogy, and running uses those terms a little bit as well, but if you think more of like general preparation, and then you have your specific preparation, and maybe you have like competition period, those are sort of just 3 phases of the year. And you maybe do general preparation for a bunch of months, your winter months, and then you get into the spring. There's maybe a more specific, what we might call build phase, where you're maybe, if you're a mountain biker or a trail runner, you're doing that more often. There's maybe more intensity in there. There's some like early races in there. So again, we're getting more specific. And then you have your competition phase, where you've stopped a lot of the volume. You're not training maybe as long, but again, very specific training. There's a lot of recovery, and then there's more races during the competition period. And that competition period in traditional periodization would not be super long, maybe like 4 to 6 weeks, if I recall right. You can't really hold that quote unquote peak, or that peak form, that competition phase, because you're not training a lot. The volume's dropping, the load's dropping, right? And so that's, I think, the way you want to think about it is general preparation, we're increasing the load. Maybe coming into the build or the specific phase, we're sort of holding that load or increasing the intensity. And then we're getting to competition phase. Then you are who you are, and you're just trying to sharpen the saw, right? Get ready for race, keep it really specific, recover between races. So the question that you asked was,
how do we avoid kind of hurting ourselves with our intensity? How do we get into intensity from base training in a smart, intelligent way?
Yeah. And so that's, I think, where it gets tricky, right? And I think that's what we've talked about before, is a lot of us aren't doing traditional periodization. You talked about 6-hour like workouts, like that's not real life, right? So a lot of times what happens is we run out of volume in the base phase. You can't increase past your 8 hours a week that you're allowed. We each get our hour a day, maybe a little bit more on the weekend, maybe less, maybe more, but that's plus or minus most of the people I would work with. So what do you do? So then in the past podcast, we should reference this in the show notes. I will try to find that Q&A. You end up putting intensity in because you want to keep the load building, right? So what I think a lot of people end up doing more of is non-linear periodization or block periodization, where you're sort of maybe do a threshold block in the middle of the winter, or you're doing some sweet spot training like we've had Frank Overton on talking about, or some tempo like Steve Neal's been on talking about, and you're just trying to increase the load. And we've, as in our last question, we talked about some days are easy, some days are harder, and that could be, again, tempo, sweet spot, whatever. And in the general prep period, we were maybe cross training and strength training more. And then once we get outside, we're making it more specific. So really what we're trying to do for most people, if we ignore that traditional periodization where we've gone volume, is we're trying to get more specific. So once you can ride outside or run outside or whatever your sport is, you should do that. And just by doing that, I would expect that things become more specific. And in that, if you're running off-road, running uphill, riding off-road, whatever, racing a bit, weekly races, you're going to have an intensified training plan. And so really that's what's going to happen. Again, if you take a couple of rest days, have a couple long, easy days, steady days, and then you have your 1 or 2 intensity days, I think it's hard to screw it up.
I think the only way people screw it up is, I mean, doing intensity every day or doing just huge, like...
Yep. Yeah, you got to progress it, for sure.
Yeah. So instead of going straight into like 15 2-minute intervals, maybe start with 5.
Yeah, and I guess a good analogy is I had a client just before we did this emailed, and he said, oh, it looks like, are we switching now to build? And he really likes like the terms, and he's, reads the books. And so it's really fun talking to him because he asks good questions. And I said, yes, it's true. But because his goal races, he was a little concerned because his main goal race is in July, but he also has May races that are important. So you get into this, like every race is important, but I have this one I want to do well in. So I said, yes, but we're going to use April and May to continue to build volume. So you could argue that, like, yes, we're getting more specific. Yes, that we're now threshold instead of maybe tempo sweet spot, but we're also increasing load and volume still. So to me, that still sounds a little bit more like a base 3, maybe early build 1, but you're still building volume. So for him and a lot of people, we're trying to increase fitness still. And then in maybe May, June, we'll get even more specific, more intense, and try and race a bit more. And then towards that July peak, that race phase, which for a lot of us, again, if we want to just finish off with that competition phase for the working class person, the 8-hour a week, my belief is that peak comes a lot more from the off-bike things. And hopefully we're planning so that in July for this client, maybe they can get a week off work. Mm-hmm. Maybe a week's a lot, but some people, if this is their big, Leadville type race, their really big race, if you can get away, sleep extra, maybe if you have family, you're away from your family, which sounds harsh, but you're away, so you're just like a hermit, basically. You ride once a day, you get a nap in.
Who uses the phrase monk mode? Was that Frank?
I think that's a Frank thing, but yeah. Maybe Frank Overton, yeah. And yeah, so that's the working person's peak, is really just trying to eliminate some of that life stress, sleep extra good, so that you have extra good sharpening, like peak workouts once or twice a week. And then that race, you're just so rested and ready and not beat up from life and, the daily grind that you're good to go. And that might be a lot of people. It's like they get a Friday off before a Sunday race. So they get Friday, they can go pre-ride easily. It's not a big rush day. Saturday's low key. Sunday they have the race, and hopefully the training and stuff's undulated in such a way, the specificity, they've seen the course maybe a couple extra times. So the preparation is just more specific. And I think for a lot of us, that's what an A race is a little bit extra recovery from life, little on the workout side is being specific, a little bit more preparation. And that would be how that competition phase would go. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, is that enough on how we're looking at intensity?
I think so. I mean, I think it's just a tricky thing because, I mean, as you said, you're dealing with people who aren't doing this as full-time jobs, so you probably never did a true like base phase.
Yeah, and I think that's why I like to keep, and this is not me, this is like Joe Friel talks about this too, the time crunch cyclist talks about it in a slightly different way, but similarly, like you don't want to stray. This is a Coach Clance who we haven't had on, but he's super smart strength coach. He says you never stray too far from the intensity. So I like to, and I'm trying to think, there's also, Steve always talked about like, you gotta like kids walking across grass, like to cut the corner at universities. I don't know why that was the analogy, but like you want to keep, like if you just keep walking the path on grass, it'll like stay beat down, right? But if people don't walk that path, right? So if you only did only volume, only endurance, and then you tried to do intensity, like you can't even find the path. But if you've been like keeping that beat down, right? Dan Pruill, who was our national coach here in Canada, he talks about keeping tops spinning, and you just got to keep the top spinning, and it doesn't take much to keep it going, but you just need to like touch that and keep it going, right? So you have like your different intensities or different training aspects, and you want to just keep those tops spinning. And I think that's in the base phase, you're keeping some sprints in, maybe like the odd, like, 2 4-minute hills that aren't your best. You just sort of like hit that intensity. It's not a full workout. And then as you come into those first workouts, just, they don't have to be crazy, right? Like it can be bottom of the zone. It can be like on the low end of the rep scheme, so that you can come back, right? Sometimes we all come out in like, the hardest 5x4 minutes like of your life, and you're just like debilitated after this workout, right? And I think that's a mistake, is again, ease into it. So if you're starting build 1 and you're going to do VO2 intervals, 2 in the week, and just make sure the first week isn't crazy and get them in, right? Again, they're just crystals in your sandcastle.
Nice tie back there.
Yeah, I mean, that was at least 5 different analogies and metaphors.
Apologies for the metaphors, guys. All right, last question here is back to sports nutrition. This is around carbohydrate. So for on the bike, or honestly, this applies to on the run nutrition as well. So for endurance nutrition, let's say, how is there such a wide range for the recommended amount of carbs per hour? 30 to 40 grams seems to be the common figure, but hearing it as high as 100 grams per hour. So I think the first thing I'll say is I haven't ever seen as low as 30 to 40 grams. And I'm sure there are some sources that would say that, but that would only be around like 120 to 150 calories an hour. And usually when we talk about carbs per hour, it tends to be 200 to 400 calories worth of carbs per hour, which is still a huge range. If you're just kind of thinking about that as just kind of one number is literally double the other number. So if you're just kind of thinking about it clinically, it's kind of like, whew, that's...
Well, and it's because we're talking about endurance, right? Like there's just such a range. So this was on Twitter, I think we got this, but it was sort of a follow-up. I'll link to it, but our last Q&A, which is the end of March 2019, was about some of this carbohydrate and fueling. We talked a bit about that. And so this person asked, why is there such a range? And I said, well, I mean, if you look at the range of endurance events, endurance like goals, really, right? So I want to finish Leadville in 12 hours. Well, someone else wants to try and set the record at Leadville in 6 hours, right? That's 6 hours of difference, and the intensity difference in that is huge.
Also forgetting that the other person could be 240 pounds to your 140.
Yeah, and they do say that, like, certainly that's going to change the work required. But they do say that like body size isn't overly correlated. Like, so a small person still may burn that same amount or be able to take in that same amount, I should say, not the burn, that gets confusing, but like what they're going to take in. And I think that's important to remember too, like before we go too far down, is that you're not necessarily replacing all of the fuel. And that's the mistake, is like
you just can't.
The amounts we're talking about are not huge in terms of what you're eating. Like 200 calories an hour is not very much, right? Like in the grams, like versus a meal, obviously, right? And versus what you're burning, right? Like I think some of the even smaller girls at the camps were like 600 kilojoules an hour. So, I mean, they're not replacing that. They're doing that 200, right? So I think that 200, that 240 calories, so that's your 50 to 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour, is pretty common. And I always say, like, that's sort of the starting spot with the athletes when we're out on these camps. I give them a very annoying running total of the minimum expectation as far as calorie intake. And again, it's around that. I always call it the 2 gels an hour, 2 scoops of mix an hour, or 1 bar an hour, right? Like a Cliff Bar, not that we have any allegiance with that, but they tend to be around that 220, 240 calories. So you have that. There's a reason that stuff is packaged in that way. That's sort of the common thinking. But back to goals, like I think the other thing to remember is that the range is probably 0 to 100 grams. in per hour in what humans could potentially have taken in and not vomited and, you know, achieved their goal somewhere between those two endpoints, right?
It's true. Yeah. For like a 5K, 0 would be.
Right. And so we'll put this, My Sports Science did a nice infographic that sort of lays this out based on the duration of the event. So you have something that's like a even shorter endurance event. So something like a 800-meter run could be, that's like a middle distance, but still you might have a fueling strategy. And so you might not have anything for that. A cyclocross race is 60 minutes. Generally, people don't have any fuel during the cyclocross race. You could argue, though, that they take in often something at the line of the race. So they might take in a 100-calorie gel at the line, which then is that part of the race. That's, you know, if it's taken in 30 seconds or 5 minutes rather before the race, you know, that's questionably getting digested during the race and used during the race. So that might be where you're seeing 30 grams an hour because they took one gel, right? So that's maybe where you could like take that in. As you get longer, you're thinking your Ironman, elite, and I said sort of expert, elite level triathlon, Ironman, ultra Ironman. Some of these people are putting out huge work capacity and have trained their gut, which I think is what the question was in the last one, was about, can you train the gut? Mm-hmm. And so they've prepared themselves and are also having such a high output that they can indeed get up to that sort of high end of the range, the 90 grams per hour. But that doesn't mean, the important thing is that that is an extreme for an extreme situation. So again, most of us cluster around that Cliff Bar an hour.
Yeah, I mean, especially with triathlon, you're going to have people eating the higher end on the bike because they're not going to be able to eat that much on the run.
Yes, exactly.
So that's a huge difference.
Exactly, yeah. So they're also like, then you could almost average over the race again and see how different that is.
Yeah, when you add in, no one's taking in anything on the swim.
Not much, right? Like the elites, certainly, I would not think are doing...
Anyone that's eating a gel in the middle of the water, like, props to you.
Well... And I guess, again, you get into, and this is my other point, is the goal of the event, right? Like, and the duration of the event, right? So you have to be very careful, again, that 6-hour versus 12-hour Leadville or Dirty Kanza or Ironman wouldn't be 6, but what are they now? Like 8 versus, what is the top? You can do 17?
17.
So those are different events, right? And so that's where you get into, well, should I have solid foods or liquid foods? Well, all the elites have liquids. Well, the elites are going really hard, relatively, right? Like, and so the fuel source is different. Mm-hmm. The fuel needs are different, right? So you get into that situation where, again, the elite triathlete is consuming more because of the output and also the training they've put into the gut, whereas the other person is not putting out as much and has more time to take it in, right? So they A, might do more solids, and B, just are out for way longer. So again, the needs are different, right? They have more time to take it in as well. Well, I had another point. Oh, the goal of the event. So a lot of people, especially in these keto days we're living in, they're like, oh, well, I don't need that. Certainly you do not need to have anything. You can survive Ironman not eating.
Okay, we'd like to not recommend that to anyone listening.
But the general consensus is, and I'll link, there's a great Alex Hutchison article about do sports drinks work, and sort of highlights some of the recent research on that and back and forth and problems with the studies and what the studies are showing. And it's fairly clear that like consuming food and carbohydrates specifically is going to increase your performance. There's a variety of mechanisms ranging from the taste to the actual like maintenance of glucose in your system. So if you're just out on an hour training ride, you don't necessarily have to have anything. If you're, again, out on a 3-hour endurance ride and you're not that concerned about comparing to your friends or setting your personal best wattage time, then you certainly could make an argument for reducing the amount of carbohydrate or not doing it. But if you're game playing, practicing your nutrition strategy for some of these big races, and then really want to push your limits at these races, then that's sort of the understanding, is that minimum expectation of the 60 grams an hour, 50 grams an hour, and then building from there as really as much as you can with not having GI issues.
Perfect. All right. I think that pretty much wraps up this episode. As always, reviews, on iTunes are super awesome. We'd love more questions. You can hit us up over at consummateathlete.com or find us on the Twitter or Instagram at Molly J. Herford and at Peter Glassford. And of course, as we said in the beginning, pre-orders of Shred Girls would be super appreciated. We don't really do a lot of advertising or, ask a lot of the audience on this podcast. So that is my one big ask. Spread the word, share with other, parents of young women in your life. That would be amazing and very much appreciated. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete podcast. You can check out my stuff over at theoutdooredit.com or by following me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford. And you can check out Peter's coaching, training plans, blogs, all that fun stuff over at smartathlete.ca or by following him on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Glassford. And if you want to support this show and other awesome podcasts, please check out wideanglepodium.com for show info, other podcasts, bonus content, and to become a donating member so you can get all of that rad behind the scenes content and help keep shows like this on the air. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the information that we're bringing to you every single week, do us a solid and pop into iTunes to leave us a rating and review. It takes you about 2 seconds. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your phone, and it really helps us out. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.